In this lesson, what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about the British Empire, talk about the development of imperialism, and talk about the development of the empire itself between 1857 and 1890. And in the specification, specifically, what we're going to do is talk about trade and commerce across the British Empire during this period. We'll take an introduction in this lesson to the commercial trading system across the British Empire and how this trading system and commercial system actually worked and the ways in which it was able to enrich the empire itself and cause and essentially be a value that is so important to the British Empire, at least during this period. We start to see in the second chapter when we look at the period from around 1890 to the start of the First World War in 1914, we start to see that there is a slight shift in the economy of the empire away from imperial colonial ventures towards the non-imperial. So, for example, trade with the United States is an example of the shift in the way the empire actually and the importance of the empire from an economic perspective begins to take place. But at least in the terms of between 1857 and 1890, trade and commerce across the empire was vitally important. So let's examine the trading system, the commercial trading system, and how it worked, why the empire was instrumental in it. Well, obviously, one of the reasons why, the main reason why the British Empire and any empire is important and valued by a number of individuals is because of the fact that it actually facilitates and is able to perpetuate economic growth and economic development. Okay, no one can deny that imperialism, okay, at least in the sort of way in which capitalism works, imperialism is a way of gaining economic wealth and value and growth. Okay, no one can deny that. The problem is with that very fact. So, as a result of that basic fact, between 1857 and 1890, trade and commerce was one of the most effective features of the empire itself. Trade and commerce was originally regulated under a system known as mercantile capitalism or mercantilism. This is essentially where a system of regulation was able to govern trade. But in addition to this, during this period, this system was slowly reformed and replaced with what are known as less protectionist and more free market approaches to the economy. So essentially, when we talk about international trade, even international trade now under the World Trade Organization, the WTO, there is this general air towards free market approaches, more of an approach towards allowing the free flow of goods and services across borders without tariffs and without taxation and without import taxes and import tariffs and all these different kinds of things that essentially represent barriers to trade. Now, where there is barriers to trade, some of these trading barriers and charges on imports and exports and stuff are known as protectionism, at least the policy of protectionism, because they protect domestic production, okay? If I, for example, am producing cars in the United Kingdom, and as a result of which my government places taxation on all imported cars, then people in the United Kingdom are going to be more likely to buy my cars because there's no additional tax on that. It's not, and so therefore they're cheaper. And so as a result of which, the government is essentially protecting my car industry, the manufacturing industry domestically, rather than allowing the free trade from abroad. So this is what protectionism is. And generally speaking, the international trading community, even to this day, doesn't like protectionism. It prefers the idea of comparative advantage. It prefers the idea of essentially allowing for the countries that are best at producing the goods and services that they are best at producing to be the ones that actually produce it and import, and everyone else just imports them, and the result of that is, rather than everybody, for example, producing cars and even countries that aren't that good at producing cars, the countries that are the best at producing cars are the ones that are able to produce those cars in that country and then export those to other countries who are themselves good at doing other things, producing lemons, part of lemon production or citrus production or cloth production, whatever it is. Every single country seems to have its own sort of advantage. The UK, for example, at the moment is probably the biggest exporter of financial services in the world, hence the City of London. So this is what is known as free trade or free market approaches. The idea of the free market is the idea that the basic rules of supply and demand and the flow of goods and services and the demand of goods being instrumental in the changing of the price of goods and the supply of those goods and all these different things, basic economic ideas are able to essentially run the economy without any interference with or interference by governments that go in and place taxation and subsidies and all these different kinds of things on different approaches to the economy. The early capitalist economist Adam Smith describes this as the invisible hand of the economy, the invisible hand of the market, being able to essentially allocate resources where it needs to go because of the basic laws of the economy itself. The result of these principles, the result of moving away from protectionism and more towards the free market, caused Britain, to become the world's most foremost trading nation. And so as a result, under this system, the empire encouraged a lot of free trade with both the colonies, but also with the rest of the world. In circumstances where trading and trade agreements were difficult to acquire, instead of doing quite heavy and quite long and intensive diplomatic negotiations, instead threats and coercion would just be used. This was particularly true where the British Empire could utilize their naval supremacy. This ability to utilize their naval supremacy became known as gunboat diplomacy. There was still trade and commerce with, which was not part of the empire. However, there was always the risk that these trade deals may not be stable due to domestic and foreign affairs. So, for example, one example of this during this period is that the cotton industry was placed into a system of an issue of concern for the British because of the American Civil War. America was a large exporter of cotton during, or at least prior to the American Civil War. The American Civil War caused quite a lot of instability among the cotton economy and the cotton markets because of obviously this inability to export when it's trying to fight a civil war. In addition to this, when it came to colonizing and when it came to the colonies themselves, trading became easier to do internally within the empire because of what was known as harmonization of commercial law. So, what does harmonization mean? For those of you who obviously aren't studying law, harmonization refers to essentially bringing into the fold all of the different colonies and essentially running the colonies and operating the colonies under the same system of law. So when it came to trading, for example, with America or trading with other European countries, those European countries had different legal systems, they had different rules in terms of their commercial law, which meant that it was more difficult to trade with those countries, with those states. But with the empire, the British Empire was able to harmonize, essentially export the commercial legal system across the entire empire such that they were all using the same rules and the same principles. And that just made it easier to trade because there was less friction in terms of having to deal with the different legal systems. Okay. So all of this became very, very important, and it resulted in what became known as the Industrial Empire, because as trade continued across the colonies, investment in the colonies began to grow as well. So investment in this regard became known as, and through the use of what is known as foreign direct investment, FDI. Okay, and FDI is essentially where people, investors, go over to a different area, okay, and establish business operations in that area. And in doing so, they are bringing funds and bringing revenue and bringing finance into that particular territory. It becomes known as a flow of investment flows, and this leads to industrialization in colonial areas, which then further facilitates trade. So as companies begin to invest in and begin to develop and produce and to extract resources from specific areas of the world and then sell those areas off, that area of the world then becomes able to facilitate deeper and deeper trade relations. All this leads to a situation where by the end of the 1800s, the latter half of the 1800s, 20% of Britain's imports came from the colonies, and over a third of the exports, British exports, went to the empire. So 33.3% of all of the Britain's exports went to different parts of the British Empire, meaning that the trade and commercial system was deeply entrenched among the empire. We do start to see this start to shift towards the end of the 1800s and into the early 1900s, as, like I said, there's greater trade with the United States. One of the main reasons why there was a hampering of trade with the United States during this period is, of course, the Civil War, the American Civil War becoming quite important. But then as America begins to grow in terms of her diplomatic Monroe Doctrine and her influence over foreign policy, at least when it comes to America's relationship with the rest of the Americas, Latin America, for example, we start to see that the US becomes a lot more of an influential trading partner, and we start to see that starts to influence Britain's exports and imports and trade across the empire. And we'll get to that in future lessons' time.